Something just cracked in Apple's carefully polished armor, and investors are taking notice. Apple's stock ticker Apple dipped this week after a significant leak surrounding the iPhone 18 Pro pulled back the curtain on something the company would have preferred to keep hidden, a potentially serious vulnerability lurking deep within its supply chain. And when you start pulling that thread, the picture that emerges is more complicated than a simple product rumor. Let's break this down carefully, because this isn't just about a leaked phone spec sheet. The iPhone 18 Pro leak didn't just reveal design choices or camera upgrades. What it inadvertently exposed was the fragile web of dependencies that Apple relies on to bring its most premium device to market. Supply chain analysts and investors immediately flagged what was buried in those details: concentration risk. That's the technical term for what happens when a company leans too heavily on too few suppliers, too few manufacturing partners, or too few geographic regions to produce its flagship product. Now, Apple has been here before. The COVID-19 era disruptions at Foxconn's Zhengzhou facility cost the company billions in lost iPhone production during peak holiday demand. Apple spent years publicly pledging to diversify, moving production to India, courting suppliers in Vietnam, reducing its exposure to any single point of failure. But the iPhone 18 Pro leak suggests that for its highest margin, most complex device, Apple may still be threading a very thin needle. The specific details emerging from this leak point toward advanced component dependencies, particularly around the custom silicon integration, the display supply arrangements, and precision manufacturing requirements that only a handful of global suppliers can actually meet at Apple's required scale and quality threshold. When you have a product that demands that level of precision, your negotiating power with suppliers shrinks, and your exposure to geopolitical friction, factory capacity constraints, or material shortages grows considerably. Markets responded accordingly. Apple shares slipped as investors recalibrated their risk models. And this matters beyond just a single trading session. Apple's premium valuation has long been supported by the assumption of operational excellence, the idea that Tim Cook's supply chain mastery is essentially a competitive moat. Any news that chips away at that narrative, even incrementally, triggers a reassessment. Institutional investors in particular watch these signals closely, because supply chain failures don't announce themselves loudly. They compound quietly, and then they hit earnings. There's another layer worth examining here. This leak itself raises questions. In Apple's world, information control is almost religious. Significant leaks of this nature don't typically happen by accident. Whether this came from a supplier partner, a manufacturing facility, or somewhere deeper in the logistics chain, it signals that Apple's information security across its extended supply network may have gaps. That's a secondary concern, but it reinforces the broader point: the further Apple extends its supply chain in pursuit of diversification, the harder it becomes to maintain the seamless operational control that defined the company's manufacturing reputation for over a decade. For long-term investors, the question isn't whether Apple survives this news. Of course it does. The question is whether this is an isolated incident or an early indicator of structural growing pains as Apple attempts to simultaneously scale into India, manage tensions with Chinese manufacturing partners, and push the technological boundaries of what the iPhone 18 Pro is supposed to represent. Apple remains one of the most valuable and resilient companies ever built. Its brand loyalty, its services revenue, its ecosystem stickiness, none of that disappears overnight because of a supply chain headline. But every empire has a pressure point, and right now, investors are staring directly at Apple's. The real question isn't whether the iPhone 18 Pro will eventually arrive in consumers' hands. It will. The question is whether Apple can keep delivering magic while the machinery behind the curtain gets increasingly difficult to control.